Thank you, Dr. Chicharo, for the kind introduction. I should also thank Anna for inviting me to be part of this this amazing lecture series. It's my pleasure and honor to be giving presentation on the subject I really enjoy talking about. I usually give a variation of this talk at our yearly epilepsy EEG course. And this usually involves a lot of back and forth teaching, blackboard teaching, with interaction typically happening between the fellows, trainees, and me. I often ask volunteers to come and draw the major sulci on the blackboard. Of course, I had to modify this to suit this virtual meeting format. I hope you find this useful. As the title of the talk indicates, this talk is focused on identifying anatomical landmarks on MRI scan to recognize the location of eloquent cortices. For the purposes of this 45-minute presentation, I will focus only on 3 eloquent regions. Number 1 is the sensory motor regions, motor cortex and sensory cortex. And to identify that, you need to know the anatomy of the central sulcus. How do you identify an axial section, sagittal section in particular? And secondly, I will focus on the language areas, traditionally called the Broca's area in the anterior language area, Wernicke's area, and the posterior language areas. And the most important sulci fissure to be remembered is the Sylvian fissure and its branches, and the superior temporal sulcus. And if time permits, we will also look at visual cortex. Visual cortices are in the banks of the calcarine fissure, and understanding the calcarine fissure and the adjacent sulci and fissure is important to recognize these structures on the MRI scan. As you know, this location of these functional regions are fairly consistent, and there is very little surprises in clinical practice. One doesn't need a cortical stimulation or an fMRI to know where the hand motor area is. It's fairly consistent in most people, at least, except when the anatomy is totally distorted. When the anatomy is totally distorted, you want to know all your tips to identify where the central sulcus is. Before we go any further, I often ask, why should I care about this, right? As you know, the epileptogenic lesions, with regard to in epilepsy practice, we are not worried as much about the pathology itself. We are more interested in the location and anatomy, because it's the location, the anatomy, and the surrounding regions is what is going to determine the semiology correlation. So if the patient has got multiple lesions, you need to know which one is correlating with the semiology, and you correlate with that. And on the reverse process, sometimes the lesions could be subtle. You have a semiology that localizes, and you need to know, for example, a patient has got a tingling in the face. You need to know where exactly is your face area so that you look for any subtle lesions like a bottom of sulcus dysplasia in those regions. And the surgical strategy will depend upon the location of the lesion. And the prediction of risk of surgery and the counseling and the risks of after the surgery, again, depends upon the anatomy. And most importantly, in patients who undergo invasive monitoring, you need to know where the electrodes are so that you localize the seizure onset zone as well as the functional zones on invasive monitoring. And lastly, and for me at least, it is fun to know. So let's go ahead in the next maybe 15-20 minutes talk about central sulcus. This is an MRI scan. As you can see, T2 axial, dorsal view on the top view. You can see a lesion obviously there, and most of you would recognize it's a cavernoma. Where exactly it's present, that's what we're going to talk about. And this is another patient, another lesion. You can see some area of hyperintensity, very likely indicative of a subtle cortical dysplasia. And the third, this is another image where again you see some subcortical gyral hyperintensity on the left side here, again likely suggestive of a cortical dysplasia. So all these regions are 3 different regions. The location of this will determine the semiology. The location of this will determine the surgical strategy and what kind of testing you're going to plan. Okay. The axial section, let's go up to the dorsal most section of the brain. That's the top view of the brain. I'm going to draw a few sulci, and if you have somebody, if there are trainees there, if you have a paper and pencil, if you want to grab a paper and pencil and draw some sulci, it will be fun too. One of the common sulci that can be easily identified is the superior frontal sulcus. And the sulci that is lateral in the anterior part of the frontal lobe is the middle or inferior frontal sulcus. And the sulcus that goes behind that is your precentral sulcus, which is often discontinuous sulci. We can have sometimes discontinuous. And the sulci behind that is your central sulcus with a typical morphology. It is usually uninterrupted by any other sulci. It's a continuous sulci. It goes all the way to the interhemispheric fissure. It doesn't go all the way to the sylvian fissure. It stops short of the sylvian fissure. And the sulci behind that is immediately behind that is your postcentral sulcus. And this is also often a discontinuous sulcus. They are not always continuous. And the other sulci to remember in the dorsal area is your intraparietal sulcus. That is travels from the posterior to anterior towards the postcentral sulcus. There is one more sulcus we need to remember is a marginal sulcus. This is right in the midline, a small dent in the top of the brain. The marginal sulcus comes from the cingulate sulcus. You have a corpus callosum, cingulate gyrus, and a cingulate sulcus that travels posteriorly, and it ascends up and peaks through the interhemispheric fissure on both sides. That's called the marginal sulcus. So that's how it's supposed to do. I think I did a decent job on drawing that. Let's go a little bit more details into this. So this is a cartoon of the various sulci. As you can see, this is the superior frontal sulcus. Let me try to change this pointer to a laser pointer. Okay, this is the superior frontal sulcus that goes posteriorly to meet the precentral sulcus. It often forms an L-shaped sulci as well as an L-shaped gyrus here. This is the superior frontal gyrus. This is the precentral gyrus because this is the precentral sulcus. And the central sulcus is a freestanding sulcus. Freestanding means it is not propped up by a sulcus in the front or the back. It's a continuous sulcus, fairly deep sulci, and it's usually not interrupted by other sulci. For example, the precentral sulcus, both the superior frontal sulcus and the inferior frontal sulcus interrupts, and the postcentral sulcus, the intraparietal sulcus interrupts. Whereas central sulcus is usually freestanding. There is always exceptions to all these rules. No two people's brain are similar. They all have some variations in the sulci. And the other thing is, if you trace the central sulcus dorsally, for this you need to go to the topmost cuts, you will often see a central sulcus that dips into the interhemispheric fissure. So it is always good to have multiple features to identify the sulci. And the posteriorly of the intraparietal sulcus that joins the postcentral sulcus. And this is the mustache-shaped marginal sulcus. I'll show you the MRI scan of the dorsal view, and you will understand what this mustache-shaped means. So let's see what the MRI scan on the dorsal aspect looks like. So this is a flare sequence, a dorsal, probably as you can see is uppermost cut. And the sulci that is anteriorly is the superior frontal sulcus. You can see that. I'm going to remove that so that you can have a look at the sulci. You can always compare with the opposite side. And it goes posteriorly and meets the precentral sulcus there. So if you understand the precentral sulcus, the gyrus immediately behind that is your precentral gyrus. And the sulcus behind that is your precentral sulcus. That's the central sulcus. And the region in between is your precentral gyrus, your primary motor cortex. And the sulcus behind that, it would be the postcentral sulcus, and the gyrus in between the central sulcus and the postcentral sulcus is your primary sensory strip, or the postcentral gyrus. And the intraparietal sulcus is not often easily visible on the axial because of the orientation. It cuts through the sulci. You can see it better in the coronal images. And the marginal sulci, as you can see, this is the marginal sulci that comes to the front here. On both sides, it gives the mustache-shaped appearance there. And usually, once you identify the marginal sulci, the sulcus that is immediately anterior to that is the central sulcus in most individuals. So identifying marginal sulcus, you find the sulcus that is immediately anterior to it. So that's the mustache that stays there. So just for you to just let me drop off all the sulci so that you can take a neat look at the superior frontal sulcus and the postcentral and the central sulcus here. So of course, sulcal anatomy is good, but it's often easier to recognize based on the gyral anatomy. You know, gyri often produces, it jumps at you. Sulci, you need to go and look for it. As neurologists know, we have the motor homunculus, which is originally very well mapped by the Penfield and the team. And we all know that the hand area of the brain has got a larger representation compared to your shoulder or the leg area. And also the face area has got larger representation. Because of the larger representation of this hand area, the precentral gyrus is often bulkier in that region, and it can be easily recognized on the MRI scan. So this is another MRI scan, again, axial view. You can all see this superior frontal sulcus, precentral sulcus. But the thing that usually jumps at me when I see MRI scan is the hand knob area. You see this region here? That's the hand knob region. You can see it on the opposite side. I'm not going to circle that. So it is also called the omega or inverted omega sign. Okay, and not everybody has this inverted omega and hand knob sign. Some people have a slightly double hump. It's called the horizontal epsilon. You have a double hump in that. That's another feature. Sometimes patient could have omega on one side, horizontal epsilon on the other side. So don't be surprised. And the other feature that would be helpful on the gyri features is the thickness of the precentral gyrus. As you can see, this is the central sulcus. This is the precentral gyrus. Is usually 1.5 to 2 times thicker than the postcentral gyrus. So that's again on the other side, precentral gyrus and the postcentral gyrus. So in most people, healthy individuals, the thing that usually jumps at when I'm seeing the MRI scan is these hand areas. Once you know the hand area, the sulcus that is immediately behind that is the central sulcus. It's pretty simple. And this is a picture of a fMRI of patient having hand movement, and you can see a marked hyperperfusion or the bold signal in the perirolandic hand regions here. And there are some variations of this omega and epsilon. So as you can see, this is the omega sign here, and this is the epsilon here. And there are some asymmetric epsilon where the medial end would be smaller and the lateral end would be larger, as you can see here. Or the reverse, the lateral and medial end will be larger and the lateral end will be smaller. And occasionally the hand knob may be completely flat, and it's called a null sign. It's kind of unusual, less common, but don't be surprised. And as you can see, even then you can see the thickness of the precentral gyrus to the postcentral gyrus will give you a clue about which one is this. And all these signs of these hand knob signs are described with the MR images 50 millimeter above the ACPC line. That's important to know. Just to recap a series of MRI images, as you can see on this image, the thing that jumps at me is your omega sign of the hand knob. So this is the precentral gyrus, this is a postcentral gyrus. I'm moving dorsally towards the top of the head. So you see this central sulcus, they are continuous, it keep going, and it comes into the interhemispheric fissure, as you can see on both sides. And this is the marginal sulcus, the mustache-shaped marginal sulcus on both sides. And the sulcus immediately anterior to that is the central sulcus. And if you go distally here, let's go here. So if you want to go ventrally towards the sylvian fissure now, so that's the precentral gyrus. It's a good idea to stay on the central sulcus here. And I'm going to leave the marker there in the central sulcus. Go back, go caudally or the ventrally. And the precentral gyrus, you can see still larger compared to the postcentral gyrus. And that's still the central sulcus, as you can see, pretty deep from surface to here. And when it goes towards the sylvian fissure, and as you know, it doesn't go all the way to the sylvian fissure, it stops here. And the gyrus immediately below this is called the subcentral gyrus, where you have a sensory motor regions are kind of combined there. So if you're given only this image, it may be difficult for you to know where exactly the central sulcus, but so it's always a good idea to scroll back and forth to find out. So in terms of the lesions here, that's the superior frontal sulcus here. You can see it here, you can see it here, and this one. And that's your marginal sulcus here. This mustache is not always pretty, and it is true for the MRI scan. Okay. And the cavernoma is in the posterior end of the superior frontal sulcus, and this is the marginal sulcus. This is the precentral gyrus here. So this lesion could be fairly safely removed with minimal, likely temporary deficit if it happens. This one, on the contrary, is right in the perirolandic region in the leg area. This patient had a leg sensory motor seizures. Any surgery in this region is going to have at least a modest motor deficit. This patient, this is right in the hand area. As you can see, the epsilon, fairly symmetrical epsilon. And this is right in the precentral gyrus in the hand motor region. This patient is at a very high risk for motor deficit if you do surgery in that region. Okay, let's go here. Let's move on to the, so I can skip this slide as for those of you who want to go over this a little bit more detail. Now we are moving towards sagittal sections. So we talked about axial sections at multiple levels, and now we are talking about the sagittal section, and we'll talk about the medial most surface and parasagittal and also lateral most surface. So this is a patient with epilepsy. As you can see, you can obviously see a lesion here. Where exactly is the lesion? Is this patient at risk for having motor deficit if you do the operation? Where is his relation to the central sulcus? How do we identify central sulcus? And the medial surface is what I'm going to talk the next few minutes. So again, we will draw some pictures or the sulci here. The sulcus that is important is a cingulate sulcus. Okay, you have a corpus callosum and you have a cingulate gyrus and the cingulate sulcus. Around the region of this splenium of corpus callosum, it goes up. And this is the one that peaks in the interhemispheric and shows this mustache-shaped appearance. And as I earlier said, the sulcus that is immediately anterior to the marginal sulcus is your central sulcus, and it usually has a dip like this direction. Okay, that's the morphology you're going to look for. And for completion purposes, this is the parieto-occipital fissure, and that's your calcarine fissure. This is a precuneus. This is a superior frontal gyrus. So again, this is the cartoon. Marginal sulcus, the sulcus anterior to that is the central sulcus. Let's see the MRI scan here. So corpus callosum, cingulate gyrus, and that's your cingulate sulcus there. And it ascends up to the marginal sulcus. And what is the immediate sulcus anterior to it? That's the central sulcus. As you can see, the morphology of that region is pretty typical. And that's your parieto-occipital fissure. There's the calcarine fissure there. The one other thing is it's always good to have some pattern recognition. And I see medial images. I often see a dinosaur pattern in the perirolandic or the paracentral lobule region. I'm going to show you what I meant by dinosaur. I showed this picture to my daughter who is 16 years. She said, I don't see a dinosaur. So it is not, so you have to get used to seeing dinosaurs on the MRI scan. So you see another one here, another one here. So basically this marginal sulcus and the central sulcus, it gives this appearance of as if an animal is turning to the back and seeing, okay. I see it again. It is not pretty in this image, but you will see this morphology. And the other thing to note is often the central sulcus, intuitively we would think it's more towards the middle, but it is closer in line with the splenium of corpus callosum. You can look at this splenium of corpus callosum, and this one is much more posterior, and then this one is also posterior. So around the splenium of corpus callosum, when you're looking for it, always look for it. This is particularly important when you're looking for a slightly distorted anatomy. So I hope you guys see the dragon now. Do you see the dragon? Hope so. Okay, so that's the cingulate sulcus, marginal sulcus. That's your central sulcus there. And the lesion is very well behind it. This patient can safely undergo this surgery with minimal, with probably essentially no risk for sensory motor deficits. Of course, the visual fibers will be impacted if it is not already impacted here. So again, as I said, this is the dragon kind of appearance there. That's what I wanted to show there. Okay, Now going to parasagittal section, which is cutting through the hand motor region. How will you identify it? So this is an example. There's a patient who is in the hospital right now, who is from South America, incidentally. So the patient has got a lesion here. What is the relation to sensory motor cortex? Where is the precentral gyrus? Where is the central sulcus? That's what we're going to talk about. So when the sagittal section cuts through the hand knob, just imagine you try to orient yourself. The hand knob is pushing, looking posteriorly. You take a sagittal section through this. What happens is the hand knob turns into a hook like this. So it's like the hand like this, like a hand knob, hand hook. And this morphology is pretty easy to recognize that. As you can see, this is the hand area. That's the central sulcus. This is the postcentral gyrus. Okay. And for this, you need thin cuts through the hand knob region. If a cut is thick cut on either side, it may completely miss it. And also, it will depend upon the morphology of the hand knob. If it is omega, you get a neat hook. If it is epsilon, you don't get a good hook. If it is null, you are not going to see it. So these are some of the examples of the hook shape. This one is the first one is pretty. The second one is not so. The third one is like this. So the sulcus that is behind that is the central sulcus. One other thing to look for is when you are looking for this hand knob and the sagittal, you always see this parietal and the frontal operculum or the insular region. So the cuts are going through the mid parasagittal that leads to the insular region. Okay. Do you see the hook now? Probably you must be seeing the hook now. So that's the hook there, and this is the central sulcus. This is the post-central sulcus, and luckily the lesion is right behind that. So this patient, if we decide to go to surgery, at least based on the lesion alone, it is the post-central. Pre-central is definitely not involved. Post-central is minimally or not involved. Now going into the far lateral section of the MRI. So we are going toward the Sylvian fissure on the lateral. Okay. So this is a patient who's got a lesion here. And it's a sort of a cystic lesion. Where exactly is it? Is it in the precentral gyrus? How do we identify precentral gyrus on the lateral surface is what we are going to talk about. And the key thing about the lateral surface is identifying the anatomy of the Sylvian fissure. As a Sylvian fissure with the let's see here, pointer is gone. So this is the stem of the Sylvian fissure. This is the posterior ascending rami. This is the anterior ascending rami and the anterior horizontal rami. There are some accessory sulci there. As neurologists, we don't have to worry. I think neurosurgeons need to. When they do surgery, they would like to know what they are. So drawing the Sylvian fissure, this is the stem of the Sylvian fissure. This is the ascending limb of the Sylvian posterior ascending limb. And this is the anterior ascending rami. This is the anterior horizontal rami. And once you identify this, the sulcus that is immediately behind that is the precentral sulcus. That's the importance of identifying that. And the gyri surrounding this rami is the inferior frontal gyri. And once you identify the precentral sulcus, the sulcus behind that is the central sulcus. And the gyrus, as I said earlier, the central sulcus doesn't come all the way towards the Sylvian fissure. It stops well before the Sylvian fissure. That gives the subcentral gyrus appearance. Occasionally, you could have the anterior rami with a single branch with an ascending and a horizontal ring. It's like, again, the region surrounding this is the middle frontal gyrus, as you can see in this picture. And once you identify the middle frontal gyrus, or the inferior frontal gyrus, sorry, and the sulcus immediately posterior to that is the precentral sulcus. So this is a cartoon from a famous publication by Nadich in 1995. That's the inferior frontal gyrus here. That's the inferior frontal gyrus. And the sulcus immediately before this is the inferior frontal sulcus, and this one is middle frontal gyrus. And the gyrus behind that inferior frontal gyrus is your precentral gyrus, and the sulcus is right behind that. So identifying this morphology is key on the lateral surface. In this, there are three major regions for the inferior frontal gyrus: pars opercularis, pars triangularis, and the pars orbitalis. Orbitalis towards the orbitofrontal region. Triangularis, they look triangular. It's easy to recognize. Again, sulcus is a little bit complicated. Finding the gyrus, if the gyrus jumps out to you, it's much easier to recognize the anatomy. So I suggest you look for the M sign for the inferior frontal gyrus. These are some variations of the M sign. I'm going to remove these things here. As you can see, you see this M? This M gyrus is inferior frontal gyrus. So if you find the inferior frontal gyrus, the sulcus immediately behind this precentral sulcus, this is your precentral gyrus, and that's your central sulcus here. This one, this is probably a much better M here, inferior frontal gyrus, precentral gyrus. And sometimes the M can be a little distorted, as if somebody has hammered on the top of the head of the M here, and could be an asymmetric. Again, this is the pars triangularis, pars opercularis of the inferior frontal gyrus. And sometimes the M, the anterior part of the M may not be very well formed. This is almost like an N-shaped thing. Again, this is the inferior frontal gyrus. So look for the M sign. It is commonly seen in healthy individuals. So that's the lateral surface of the brain, and that's the Sylvian fissure I'm going to draw here. This is the posterior. This is the stem of the Sylvian fissure. This is anterior ascending rami, horizontal rami, and this is your inferior frontal gyrus. So this has to be the precentral sulcus, and that's the central sulcus, and you have the precentral gyrus right here. And this is another one on the opposite side. Again, you probably saw the M-shaped gyrus, inferior frontal. So the precentral sulcus is immediately posterior, and the central sulcus is behind that. In between is your precentral gyrus. So fairly easily recognizable on the far lateral. So this is the lesion we saw earlier. That's the Sylvian fissure there. And this is the anterior ascending rami. As you can see, part of the M sign you're seeing. So this is inferior frontal gyrus. That's the precentral sulcus. That's the central sulcus. This patient's lesion is right in the inferior part of the precentral gyrus. There is one more thing, cool thing about central sulcus marker in newborns. Babies come with color coding. That's how you remember. Because their T2 weighted images are showing unmyelinated white matter, the perirolandic regions are slightly better myelinated. Okay. So it leaves a hypointense signal throughout the perirolandic region of the central sulcus. You can trace all the way down here. So you can see the top here, probably hand knob sign. And then, as you can see, the hand knob develops in utero then. Okay. Moving on to the second section of the talk. I think we are done maybe 25 minutes here. Second section is relatively shorter because we already covered most of the anatomy. The language areas, the one way to look at the Sylvian fissure is anterior end of the Sylvian fissure is the Broca's area, posterior end is the Wernicke's area relation. In between is your perirolandic sensory motor regions. That's the way to look at Sylvian fissure. So this is a famous pathological specimen of Broca's patients, D-long. You can see a destructive lesion in this region. And this is another patient of one of ours with a lesion in the posterior temporal supramarginal region. So we have talked about this earlier. So we will straight dive into the inferior frontal gyrus. You know, the inferior frontal gyrus has got three parts. The middle one is the pars triangularis. The posterior one is the pars opercularis. And usually expressive language areas are present either in the pars opercularis or adjacent part of the pars triangularis. Is Brodmann's area 44 and 45. Usually when you do subdural grids, you usually see in only one or two contacts showing this expressive speech area. And as you can see, that's the Sylvian fissure, and that would be the potential Broca area in the dominant hemisphere. Again, you already saw this M-shaped gyrus. That's the posterior end of the M-shaped gyrus is likely to harbor the expressive language areas. And in this patient of Broca, you can see there is a marked distraction of the pars opercularis and adjacent pars triangularis in this patient. And with regard to Wernicke's area, it is much more poorly localized. It is very variable. It could be, you can have multiple regions within that posterior perisylvian region having the speech arrest with cortical stimulation. But the classical literature talks about a depth of the posterior end of the superior temporal sulcus, adjacent posterior superior temporal gyrus, adjacent part of the supramarginal gyrus, and also some adjacent part of the angular gyrus. Sometimes you could even see in the dorsal aspect of the middle temporal gyrus too. So that's the region here. Again, identify the sylvian fissure posterior, and Wernicke's area is somewhere located around it. It is variable, very likely to be more diffusely distributed. That is why patients who have Wernicke's aphasia, after some time, when you see them on follow-up, they are much better than when they had the initial insult. The recovery pattern could be a little bit better because of wider representation. So this is the other patient we talked about. This patient had a lesion that was on the left side of the brain, which was encircling the supramarginal, superior temporal, and the superior temporal sulcus region. So it's in the core of the potential language area. Again, we need to do functional studies to confirm whether the language is over there or not. Moving on to the third section, I think we do have some time for the completing the third section. So we are going to talk about calcarine fissure and the visual cortex. Okay. This is a patient I saw maybe 10 years ago when I was in fellowship. It was fascinated me. This is a teenager who had an ictal vertigo and a nystagmus. And it was a nystagmus with a fast face to the left side. And we found a lesion, which is, I'll make it easier for you with an arrow mark there, as you can see, blurring and a thickened gyri cortex around this region. So the question is, where is it? What is in relation to the calcarine fissure? Okay. So again, let's try to draw some calcarine fissure features here. Calcarine fissure and the parieto occipital fissure, you always start drawing behind the splenum of corpus callosum. Okay, you start there, and the parieto occipital fissure goes posteriorly and dorsally, whereas the calcarine fissure is posteriorly and almost horizontal. Okay, and this orientation is important to recognize the sulci in the axial and the coronal sections. And so this is a parieto occipital fissure. This is a calcarine fissure. It is this part is also called the anterior calcarine sulcus or fissure. So, and the region of the brain cortex between the parieto occipital and the calcarine is the cuneus, and this below that is the lingual gyrus. Anterior to that is the precuneus. As you can see in this cartoon, the calcarine fissure can be morphologically, could be much more horizontal or tented, and could be irregular. Again, left and right could be very different. So it is a good idea to familiarize with this morphology so that we don't overinterpret. When you have an occipital lobe epilepsy, that's the first time somebody sees a calcarine fissure, they'll think, oh, these looks abnormal. So it's very important to be familiarized with that. So in the lateral, so this is the splenum of corpus callosum. As you can see, that's the parieto occipital fissure, and that's the calcarine sulcus. It is fairly easy to recognize on the sagittal section. Okay, so one more time here, I removed that and I'm just playing it again. And the visual areas in the depth of the banks of the calcarine fissure in the superior and the inferior part of the calcarine fissure. That's the cuneus, lingual gyrus immediately below that, and the precuneus there. I guess you probably see the dragon now here. Okay, let's forget the dragon here. That's the parieto occipital fissure. It's the parieto occipital fissure. And that's the calcarine fissure. Calcarine fissure is the same patient. You can see the right side is a little bit tented, double, and the left side is much more horizontal. So their variations are pretty common. It's parieto occipital fissure, even much more common. So how do you identify these fissures on axial sections? It is important to understand the orientation of the sulcus and your orientation of the plane of imaging. That is very critical to understand which plane is more likely to show the sulci. For example, if we do an axial section, multiple cuts, I had some 6 cuts so far, and 5 of the cuts will catch the parieto occipital fissure. because parietal occipital fissure is almost perpendicular, not perpendicular, perpendicular-like to the plane of imaging. Whereas the calcarine fissure can be missed completely unless you get thin cuts, or it may be caught in maybe 1 or 2 cuts. It's not unusual to see 0 cuts if the axial images are taken thick cuts. So the volumetric sequences will always have this, but otherwise you may miss it. So that's the axial images, starting from all the way from the top. I'm going to show you 8 cuts here. So you guys probably see this hand knob here, central sulcus, post-central sulcus, and that's your marginal sulcus here. And we still do not see much of a parietal occipital fissure. As you can see, it's much more at the top. Again, this probably is a parietal occipital fissure, all the more back, but you're more likely to see when it is closer to the callosum very clearly there. That's the parietal occipital fissure, much more posteriorly here. Okay, that's the one. And now you can see it better now, because as you get inferior, it's going to be closer to the corpus callosum. So as you can see, this is the callosum here. This is farther now. If I go to the next cut here, that's the callosum here. That's the fissure here, parietal occipital fissure. It's going to move closer, further, and comes immediately below the splenium of corpus callosum. So that's the parietal occipital fissure. And the axial, as you can see, only slice number 7 and 8 would take the calcarine fissure here. That's a calcarine fissure. That's also a calcarine fissure. And very likely this is also calcarine fissure, because as you can see, this is kind of a tented appearance. So it is cutting the anterior part as well as the posterior part, you can see. So it can be complex. So understanding the orientation of sulci is important to recognize in multiple planes of imaging. Now looking at the coronal sections. So as you can see, coronal section is very good because it's going to cut through multiple slices, is going to capture both calcarine fissure and the parietal occipital fissure. And the one important thing to remember is in the anterior part, they are united. As we go posteriorly, these two fissures kind of widen the space between the two. The space between parietal occipital fissure and the calcarine fissure widen as we take us posteriorly. Many centers would do coronal section, which is perpendicular to the long axis of the hippocampus. That may be looking closer to this. Again, you're always going to see that behind the corpus callosum, okay? Always look for it. So this is a cut that was cutting through the corpus callosum here. You probably barely catch the parietal occipital fissure here. This one is cutting through the parietal occipital fissure. You can nicely see this here. So this is the fissure that will go towards the ventricle here. And taking one more cut here. Again, at this time, this is the junction where the parietal occipital fissure and the calcarine fissure unites. Okay, that's usually, let me make sure that laser pointer here. The parietal occipital fissure and the calcarine fissure unites is usually, it's kind of a crumpled appearance there. It's not a very clean look there. And if we go further, you can now start seeing this, the parietal occipital fissure independently. This is the calcarine fissure. That's the parietal occipital fissure. You can see clearly this is the parietal occipital fissure, all three here. And the calcarine fissure is behind that. They are kind of medially, they are separated widely. If you even go further, it will be even further separated. Okay. So the orientation of the sulci and the orientation of the plane of imaging is important to understand and recognize these fissures. The other tip in the coronal section is whenever there is a confusion about which fissure is the calcarine, look for the occipital horn of the lateral ventricle. The fissure that goes towards the occipital horn is the occipital or the calcarine fissure. So that is another clue for you to remember. So this is the calcarine fissure here. So coming back to our patient with the ictal vertigo, this is the lesion here. If I take the lesions cut here, this is much more anteriorly and a little bit more posteriorly. And this is where this lesion was. This lesion was immediately behind and inferior to the parieto-occipital fissure, this blurring of vision. Of course, the radiologists have a lot of different tools to help them. They put a mark there and they can reorient with all the images. Whenever that is an option, you should always use that. If you have that facility, the capability within your software, always use that. As you can see, this is the parieto-occipital fissure, and this lesion is right here, behind the parieto-occipital fissure. Okay. This patient had a surgery 10 years ago. He continues to be seizure-free. He's a young adult now. So this is the conclusion slide, final slide. I hope you will be able to remember some of the signs I described about the perirolandic region, the hand motor sign, the hand knob sign, the mustache-shaped marginal sulcus, omega, epsilon, dragon, and understanding that the hand knob turns into a hook kind of appearance in the sagittal section. And hopefully, whenever you see McDonald's sign next time, you think about inferior frontal gyrus and the anterior and the posterior part. Okay, the posterior part is the pars opercularis, that is the most important for your language area. And I hope you had a good understanding about the orientation of the sulci and the fissures and the plane of imaging and how it helps to capture the sulci. Thank you. I'm going to stop here. If somebody is interested in the references, these are some of the references. I wrote a chapter for Dr. Wiley's book on MRI scan. At that time, I got interested in this anatomy and started working more on it. Thank you.